This panel, the topic of this panel is Power to the People, Policy and Systems Change Legislation. So we're going to have folks talk about some of the current campaigns and legislations they're involved in, and talk about some recent victories that they're working on, and some strategic organizing and some of the organizing strategies for their organizing. So I think this is the first panel you're on, George, that you're not moderating. So I'm gonna let you introduce yourself. And so I know in the last panel I just say briefly about who you are and how you got into this work. And so if you want to take this opportunity to just say a little bit about who you are, please feel free. And if you all feel like you already said it, you can elaborate on something else. I know it's kind of weird to ask you who you are twice, but okay, here you go.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I know I got the post-lunch comatose crowd, and everybody still got that itis from that good soul food you had for lunch, but I figure it's good to shake it off a little bit, right? So real quickly, in terms of who I am, my name is George Galvis. I'm a proud co-founder of Community United for Restorative Youth Justice, and All of Us or None. I serve on the board of Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and I got involved in this work because I'm formerly incarcerated. When I was 17 years old, I was arrested and charged with multiple felonies for my participation in a drive-by shooting, and I realized while I was incarcerated, I began to just kind of reflect on a whole lot of things, and there were still a lot of things that weren't sitting well with me. And two things happened, I think, while I was locked up. One was the LA uprising. So anybody remember Rodney King? Right? And that was really probably one of the most high-profile cases that was videotaped, you know what I mean? Speaking of like protest movements and taking it to the streets, right? And so, and the way the media was framing it was in a very sort of problematic way that I felt like really kind of minimized what was really going on. They just kind of referred to it as looting and rioting and senseless violence and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate what I was feeling, but I knew that there was something wrong because I had experienced police violence, and I think along with many other people, we thought, well, it's on videotape. How can they deny it this time? You know what I mean? How can justice be denied this time? So that occurred along with the passing of Cesar Chavez, right? And I didn't know a lot about who he was back then. They had the vigil back where I used to do my dirt. I'm from 24th and Mission, pre-gentrification in San Francisco. And so they're holding the candlelight vigil right in my hood, and I didn't know who he was, and I wasn't there either because I was locked up. So I felt a little something too about that, like he's supposed to be important to us some way, somehow, and so when I got out, I found my way into community college, and through community college, I took ethnic studies courses. I read Frantz Fanon, Alfred Memmi, Paulo Freire, and I cut my teeth in organizing in my first year of community college, organizing against 3 strikes, against Prop 184 and Prop 187, which was like a crimmigration state ballot initiative that was really criminalizing people based on their documentation status, right? So that's how I got involved in this work, and I've been doing it now for about 23 plus years.
Okay, I'm all so you could say a little bit more about yourself, but also we're gonna get right to kind of current campaigns because this panel is supposed to go to 4 o'clock and it is already 3:33. So use your check-in opportunity to also go into your campaigns and anything else you want to say. I know you spoke a lot about your demands already, so.
Okay, so Maria Villalta, Justice for Alex Iappo. So one thing that I didn't mention on the previous panel was that we were currently trying to work with Supervisor Avalos in San Francisco, trying to kind of freeze the budget, the San Francisco Police Department's budget, so that once there's an agreed upon reform through the San Francisco the commissioners, the police commissioners, and then also the San Francisco POA come into an agreement on this reform that we're supposed to be establishing, that they hold some funds. The number that was initially talked about was 200 million of the funds of San Francisco's budget was supposed to be held. The San Francisco Police Department fought us on that. So right now we're currently at the table trying to figure out if they're willing to work with us on $12 million to be held until some kind of database or some kind of way to report back any kind of police shootings or misconduct issues or reporting of any officers disciplinary actions or anything, if there was any filed complaint against the officer and things like that, and how to make that a public document. Just because I think if they're public servants, we should all be able to see what the community is stating about these officers, and so we're currently in that fight right now.
Kat Brooks, co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project. So I feel like before I go into the campaigns, I want to just talk about our theory of change or our ideology is we actually don't believe that police departments can be reformed because they're not broken. They're doing what they were born to do. They were born to catch, hunt, incarcerate, and kill niggas, and they're still doing that. So what we're really interested in is 21st century solutions to community safety that have nothing to do with the current paradigm. That said, we also recognize that we have to meet the people where they're at, right? And we need to do something immediately to stem the tide of Black and brown bodies that are falling all over this country as a result of state violence. And so as a result, we believe in radical reform on the way to revolution. And revolution can mean all kinds of things to a bunch of different people, but ultimately it means something radically different, unrecognizably different from what we have today. So I talked earlier about the Divest Invest campaign, and that'll be long term, but we're really going after that 50% of OPD's budget to be redirected towards things that not just us crazy radicals say keep us safe, but like mountains and mountains of research say jobs keep us safe. Mountains and mountains of research say education keeps us safe, right? Mountains and mountains of research say families that stay together, right, are able to keep communities safe. So some of that. We have an alternative model to policing in the form of Urban Shield Security, not Urban Shield the War Games, and they had the name first, Urban Shield Security. They hold down several blocks in the Laurel and work with business owners to call them instead of the police. So we're working on how we replicate that and learn from it and replicate in other places. AR-15s, there was a woman named Yvette Henderson who in February 2015 was gunned down in broad daylight in Emeryville, which is right on the border of Oakland, with an AR-15. Her big crime was shoplifting. She was a mother and a grandmother. And so we really started asking the question why. The Emeryville Police Department, I think there's 10,000 people in Emeryville. It's small, right? While they're patrolling our streets with AR-15s. It is not to say that they can't kill us with 9mm or batons or tasers or anything else, right? Again, it can't be reformed. That said, there is a mentality that happens when you're patrolling neighborhoods of Black and brown people with military-grade assault rifles, right? That we feel contributes to the epidemic that we're facing. And then, so we've launched a campaign to eliminate AR-15s out of Emeryville. A case we're working with now, Mateo Doro Valencia, who was gunned down in Newark, which is a little further out. Same thing in the back with an AR-15. So we're expanding that campaign there with that family. And then the other campaign that we're working on is, it's called 30 Days or Less. So one of the games that so out here, the coroner and the sheriff's department is one and the same. And so one of the games that they play is they prevent families from getting a hold of that coroner's report. It's usually done in 48 to 72 hours, but they'll hold it for 6, 8, 10 months. Well, without that, you can't really file your civil suit, right? So we've launched this campaign, 30 Days of Less. We've had to do a couple of direct actions to force them to give the coroner's reports to their families. So we're working on getting that actually passed as some sort of policy. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, which may not be make everybody happy, but I have to stick true to our values, is there's this big call for police commissions across the country, right? Oversight bodies of police departments. And great, right? We know that the police cannot put police the police. Does that make sense? That said, the only way these things have teeth, the only way that they matter is if we're doing it in the spirit of what the Panthers meant by community control of the police. When you're talking about bodies that are controlled by mayors or controlled by city council members or get appointed or they get to choose the selection panel, excuse my language, but it's bullshit. And you're pacifying the people with bullshit and you're lying to the people and you're just creating another reform that a whole new group of organizers are gonna have to come up, right, and overturn in a couple years later. So I really encourage you to not follow in the pathway of San Francisco or Oakland when you go home, if this is a conversation you are having in your community, and ensure if we're talking about police commissions, that we're talking about community-controlled police commissions that have the power to hire, to fire, to discipline, right, and that they are the beginning and the middle and the end of that story.
So when we talk about policy systems change, I think it's complex. I think that, a lot of times people just assume legislation and then other folks just think about kind of grassroots organizing and direct actions with the demand of some sort of policy change. And most often, those two groups are not talking with each other. There's no integrated collaboration. There's no inside-outside strategy. And so I think that's one of the things that we're trying to kind of do a little bit of paradigm shift around. So Courage, Community United for Restorative Youth Justice, was born out of the gang injunction organizing here in Oakland. So I helped start the Stop the Injunctions Coalition. As a member of All of Us or None, I was a firm believer that we have to elevate the voice and power of those who are directly impacted. And so as community members, we couldn't just organize and speak on behalf of the young men who were defendants. We actually had to empower them. And so my staff were defendants in the Fruitvale gang injunction. And so the first thing we did, and this might kind of relate to some of the other topics, but I think, Western society tends to compartmentalize everything. So we talk about healing on one panel, then we talk about policy on another panel. And in some ways, all these different things are inextricably connected. If we're developing the capacity of formerly incarcerated people and people who have experienced trauma, and we're trying to elevate their voice and power, we have to have healing-informed, culturally rooted practices that help move them beyond trauma. You know what I mean? We believe in the concept of La Cultura Cura, culture is healing, and we're very much committed to reclaiming, relearning, and returning to the traditional ways of our ancestors. We had rites of passage and healthy ways to guide our young people into adulthood, you know what I mean? And we understood that everybody was a blessing, everybody had a sacred purpose. So I say that much in that was a part of the process around our gang injunction organizing. And as a result of that, our young men who were defendants of the gang injunction began to take a look at their community, the community that you're in here right now. If you just go up the street, a lot of our work, although this is a space where we build community, is really taking place outside of these walls. You know what I mean? So we're responsible for about a dozen murals out here in the community, and with each and every mural, there's a social message, and with each and every mural, there was community involvement from the folks from that neighborhood about what was going to go up on that wall, and there was a block party to make sure we were doing popular education and mobilization around those issues. And so you'll see issues around displacement and gentrification, but not in isolation, linking it to policing. So when we see policing in Oakland, it is by design. And it's not about public safety. It's about making communities of color feel uncomfortable so that we feel so uncomfortable that we decide to move to Stockton or Antioch or someplace else, and that they can push us out. And the same thing with the school district. Education, justice, all these issues are inextricably linked. And it is all part of a design to push us out of our communities right now, because the tech sector from San Francisco and Silicon Valley is spilling into Oakland, and there's not a place for us here anymore. So I say that much to say that as a result of elevating the voice and power of those directly impacted, it became an embarrassment to the city at a certain point. First, they kind of laughed at us. Nobody took us seriously. Even the so-called progressive nonprofit organizations here in Oakland came out and supported the gang injunction. Folks like NAACP, PICO, who, does a lot of great work, but, Pastor McBride was out there standing behind, what's his name from Acts Full Gospel? Yeah. Anyways, one of the big pastors here in Oakland, you know what I mean? So, they all came out and said, we need a gang injunction. The police need every tool at their disposal, you know what I'm saying? So all these folks, who were supposed to basically be allies and, or natural allies to this work, were supporting the gang injunctions because of the violence that was happening in the community. What we knew through every empirical research study is that gang injunctions don't improve public safety. They're great tools for displacement and gentrification, right? Then, after a while, we started showing up like 500 deep to City Hall, and the young men are speaking in an articulate way, and they're saying, we don't want a gang injunction zone, we want a youth empowerment zone. Invest in our communities, you know what I'm saying? And the city, we said, is always asking organizations who get city funding to prove the absolute efficacy of what they do. But we don't hold police to that standard. We don't hold jails and prisons to that standard. So we said, prove that the gang injunction works. The police, as much as they tried to sugarcoat their study a year later, actually their own study showed that crime had gone up after the gang injunction, after wasting $4 million of taxpayer money on just the trial alone. You know what I'm saying? So at a certain point, it became unpopular. But then what they said finally is, oh, well, we're just not going to enforce the injunction. We're going to look at other tools, other strategies. But they didn't dismiss it. Cases weren't lifted until March 2015. And after time and time again, they see these young men who they said were the worst of the worst, who were the sociopaths, who were the bullet magnets, and they see them with just a little bit of investment, none of which came from the city. They had built a community garden right here, Fruitvale Community Garden. Well, these young men had a vision to beautify their community. It was a blighted, abandoned lot where all this illegal dumping had been taking place for about a decade. So you'd go over there and you just see like old tires, mattresses, refrigerators, overgrown weeds, you know what I'm saying? And the city will tax any property owner who even just has like their building tagged on for contributing to blight in the community, you know what I'm saying? Well, it turned out that the slumlord was the city of Oakland, who was contributing to blight in the gang injunction at the same time that they're criminalizing these young men. And what the young men did with the community support is pulled all those weeds, hauled out all that garbage out, and got seeds and soil and turned it into a vibrant community building space for the entire community to enjoy. You know what I'm saying? They did that. They started beautifying the community, putting murals out there. And every single time we'd be, at a gathering where there's city officials, sometimes it'd be at the state capitol, we'd always remind the city, oh, these young leaders that are getting these accolades, by the way, they're still defendants in the gang injunction. And it just became egg in their face. It became embarrassing. So as of March 2015, we became the first community-led effort to fully defeat a gang injunction in the entire nation. So all cases were dismissed and the gang injunctions were lifted. So it's a beautiful victory, but one of the things we have to do is stay diligent, because what they have now is called ceasefire. And ceasefire is not unlike a gang injunction. It takes a deficit mapping approach, saying that these are the worst of the worst, and they do call-ins and they posture and they threaten them, but they say that it's a carrot and a stick. So they call in 20 dudes and they'll posture and threaten them and huff and puff for a little while where it's all systems people, and at the end of the process they'll say, hey, but we really do want to help y'all. We got 2 jobs at Chicken and Waffles that is dishwasher. So you guys go ahead and arm wrestle, see who gets them 2 jobs. Basically is what they're telling these young brothers, right? So, you tell me about time? Okay, I'm being told to wrap it up. All right, so my point is that's an example of policy change through grassroots organizing. In addition to that, though, we do what's called participatory policy action, which means that we let our young people develop our policy priorities. And when we are dealing with our young people who are systems impacted, we ask them what are the 2 most important things, pressing things, and this is after going through a whole process of leadership development and political education with them. And the 2 things that they identified to us were police abuse and jobs. So all of our legislative efforts in the Capitol and Sacramento have focused on those 2 issues based on the priorities that our young people identified. And we've had 2 police bills signed by the governor in the last few years. One was AB 2634. So that kind of came in the spirit of the gang injunction. So since they put an injunction on us, we said we want to put an injunction on the police. And what that does is it gives, so before, if you were a victim of police abuse, or the police killed your loved one, the only recourse you had was to sue in civil court for monetary damages, right? And what this did is in civil court, you can actually ask and a judge can grant and place an injunction on the police if you can demonstrate that there's been a consistent pattern of civil rights abuses to force policy and systems changes. San Francisco is ripe for it. So now it's about implementation. We got it signed by the governor. No one's tested it in California yet. The other bill that we had signed was AB 256. AB 256 was basically Penal Code 141, which said it was a felony for a police officer to plant, destroy, or tamper with physical evidence. And it really came out as a result of white folks being so mad that OJ got acquitted. You know what I mean? White folks were so furious to see OJ get acquitted, you know what I'm saying, that, you know, they really had to find someone to blame. And so they saw Mark Furman, and Mark Furman was a dirty cop who planted a bloody glove, which tainted the whole case, right? Because once you had him planting evidence, it basically tainted, the jury from being able to believe anything, right? And so they made it a felony for police to plant, destroy, or tamper with physical evidence. Good thing, I think. But it had said nothing about digital evidence. And so our young people are learning all about know your rights, and they're filming the police, and yet cops are confiscating phones and destroying the evidence. And so we expanded Penal Code 141, and it was signed by the governor to include all digital evidence. That has to be tested too. I've read articles about jurisdictions in California which law enforcement have destroyed digital evidence, and there still is not any accountability. So when I say it's complicated, we can get the policy victory, but enforcing it and the implementation ends up being about 90% of the battle.
I want to make sure, so Kat, I know you have to go soon, so I'm going to pass it that way if you have any other stuff to say. Oh yeah, be careful with that.
No, I mean, I think the only other thing that I want to say is I think what George just really highlighted was how important it is to unfracture our movement. I don't know if that's a word or not, but right, I'm sort of calling us in a little bit in terms of being clear what our comrades are doing, right, that complements the work we're doing. So I'm even looking at the Teodoro Valencia case, right? That's going to be a clear case of harm that injunction piece could work around. And so how do the folks that are locking themselves to shit talk to the folks that are pushing this policy stuff and really use that to maximize impact and outcomes for our folks? Not how, we know how, but time to do.
Does everybody here, I know that the word injunction, gang injunction, has been thrown out. Do you all know what it is? Raise your hand. I just want to scan the room. Okay. The way I explain it too, it's like a restraining order on a whole community. And so, one of the staff here at Courage, he's 5 generations in this community in East Oakland, and he was being told he can no longer come to this neighborhood where he had roots that went back 5 generations. And so, just wanted to say that. I know it's a simple way of explaining it, but yeah, and that we see it directly connected to gentrification and push out. Do you have a question?
I'd like to know if you could talk a little bit about some of the new work that's happening around challenging really extortionist fines and fees that people are facing around driver's licenses and tickets and et cetera. And I don't know if people realize this, but 65% of the budgets of local courts come from these extortionist fines and fees that poor folks are having to cough up. And it's billions of dollars statewide. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and your strategies around how to take back, our courts and to take back, people's livelihoods around this kind of stuff.
Sure. 2 quick examples just on some of the fee struggles. So here in Alameda County, the average family whose young person was incarcerated was having to pay about $3,000 in fees and penalties. So you're taking the most vulnerable families in the community and further destabilizing them and imposing fees that they now have to come up with. And if they don't pay them, that becomes criminal. You know what I mean? So we just recently, through organizing and through some advocacy and research, got our Board of Supervisors to waive that. There was also a bill by some of our allies that got killed, placed in suspense in appropriations that didn't get passed, so that would have been applied to all 58 counties in the state of California. So that's an ongoing struggle. The other struggle is we've been really wanted to try to focus on some pre-adjudication bail reform here in Alameda County. 80% of those in our county jail, in Santa Rita Jail, are eligible for bail, but just can't afford it. So we are operating a poor people's prison, and that's bullshit. You know, so that's another thing that we're working on through the Justice Reinvestment Coalition that Courage co-founded.
George, you were also a litigant in a case around expanding the rights of formerly incarcerated people to vote. You want to mention that?
Yeah, so me and Dorsey Nunn were both plaintiffs, and LSPC, who I serve on the board of, was one of the, what's the legal term? For, I mean, basically they were one of the, okay. So in any case, AB 109, for those who aren't from California, was basically the governor's response to multiple things. One is that prisons and the prison industrial complex in California nearly bankrupted our state. And that was really it was really a financial motivation more than anything else. But there was also additional pressure because there was a state Supreme Court decision that said because of overcrowding and our prisons being over 175% capacity, that it needed to be shrunk down to 135 or some arbitrary number. So there was that pressure. As a result of that, the governor and the pro tem and the speaker at the state capitol devised what's called Assembly Bill 109. So AB 109 said that if you're nonviolent, non-serious, non-sexual, then we're going to take you from state prison and we're going to send you to the counties. And so they were going to give that money to the sheriffs, all the cost savings, you know, so they weren't going to give the counties the same amount of money that it costs to lock people up, but they were going to give them a fraction of that, and it was all going to go to the sheriffs. And some of us said that if you're non-serious, non-violent, non-sexual, maybe that should be non-jail. And then there became a question, because now that they're in county jail, if you're in county jail, you have the right to vote. If you're in state prison, you don't. But we'd already won another lawsuit around voting rights, and so we had to sue the Secretary of State, and I was one of the plaintiffs for AB 109 folks to have the right to vote, and we were able to re-enfranchise 60,000 voters here in California as a result of that.
I don't know if people saw, because we were here, most of us were here yesterday, the Department of Justice announcement about private prisons. And I know that it's like a small piece of a really huge problem, and we don't really know what's exactly going to happen, but I just want to take a minute to celebrate all that work it's taken to get to that spot. And I'm not going to be here tomorrow, but I'm really curious about, since there's awesome people here, about what does that mean for your strategies moving forward, or like, that's such a huge deal. Oh, the Department of Justice isn't going to renew any contracts, and some of the contracts that exist are still 5 years out. So, you know, good and bad stuff in there, but like, it's a big deal, and it doesn't really cover immigration detention centers. Big problem, but like, I'm just curious what people think about that, and it's really new, but it's really big.
So that's huge, but that's the Department of Justice. All ICE detention centers are run by Homeland Security, which is a different department. Homeland Security has not made the same commitment, which means that Corrections Corporation of America and other private prisons can still profit off immigration issues and the criminalization of people based on immigration status or perceived immigration status in this country.
And LASE have been working on that. And so this is like a first step. They're really excited. They're still going to be pushing harder and more specifically connecting individual politicians who receive money from private prisons with information before elections, so people get to know who they're getting money from. Okay, sorry. Go.
How do you're talking about how to unfracture the movement, and I wanted you to speak a little bit more to how and what that looks like.
Right. So, I think it's got to be part of the work planning, right? I mean, in the same way that I was, no, seriously, in the same way that I was talking about that we wanted APTP to not just be reacting to state violence, right? Like, it's got to be part of the proactive planning. I don't know, I see you, what, 3-4 times a month? The fact that we have, I don't have an excuse for why George and I haven't sat down and had that conversation, right? The other thing we got to do is we have to build capacity. And I was having a conversation with somebody early, he's left the room. Like when we were Onyx and we were like all of 4.5 people, right, it became really difficult to get anything done. And so we made it, as an African liberation organization, we made an intentional decision to work with white folks. I mean, intentional decision to work with white folks because white folks were showing up and white folks said they want to do some work and we had work that needed to get done, right? We've got guidance and parameters and there's lots of stuff around that, but it exponentially has increased our capacity. Right? And part of what door that opens is how we have conversations, right? I was talking about the work that's happening to build the relationship on both sides of the bridge. That's intentional work that we're doing, that we commit organizers from our crew to go sit in Frisco 500 meetings, to help provide trainings. APTP helped shut down when City Hall shut down, that was APTP security, right? Making sure that rocked. It's about building intentional relationships and having intentional conversations. Now, that's just about working together. There's a whole other thing about this fractured-ass movement that we don't have time to get into today. So I just want to acknowledge I'm not talking about all of that. And then I think it's also how you move. I'm serious about this accountability thing and who you're accountable to and what your values and what your principles in the work are. I mean, there's folks from Oakland in here, but I'm pretty sure you talk to people at APTP or Honest, they're going to tell you we may not always like them, but we know where they're coming from. We know what they're going to do, and we know that they're accountable to the folks. And those are the values that we have to encourage across our movement because then that eliminates all of the other garbage, right? Like if you know where you're coming from and I know where I'm coming from, we can have a conversation about the work and how we get there without having to go through all these other changes that nobody has time for anymore, let alone the doors that opens for the state to come in and really fracture movements, right? I'm going to the herbalist now. Goodbye.
All right, I'm gonna hand it to George. He's gonna close us out and talk about our the new proposition, Prop 57.
It doesn't have anything. Lindsay? I'm sorry, you posed a question. Lindsay. Yeah, you posed a question about how he was gonna honestly answer a question, what can help the funder, what you guys could do better to help us, or I don't remember the question, but I want, since he's up here, I want you to answer the question on, truthfully, what you could tell them the way they can help fund us better. I don't remember your question, but he was gonna.
George had said he had a series of questions.
Yes.
Stupid questions
That's it.
I get where you want the money. I want to know what the stupid questions are.
That's it. I'm sorry. I want you to honestly answer that question.
That's a whole nother panel, man. But I really think that in the future, we need to have a panel on stupid shit that philanthropy does to disrupt movements. That might be a whole fucking conference, to be honest. And I would love for you to invite all the philanthropic partners y'all know. So I appreciate the question. I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one, and I do think we need to focus on that question. Yeah. Oh, I'm gonna tell them on Sunday a little something, trust me, when we have our internal meeting. All right, so I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what's happening next, how we're moving forward. So everybody and their mama's using the language around mass incarceration, whatever the hell that's supposed to mean, and some people are saying, let's reduce it by 50%. That's, and what I mean? That's some arbitrary ass shit. Why Van Jones say 50%? You know what I mean? Well, I'm gonna do 51%. Fund me. You know what I'm saying? So why not 100%? And why are we just talking about mass incarceration? You know what I'm saying? So, that's another workshop too. But the bottom line is this: one of the biggest drivers to feeding the beast of the prison industrial complex has been criminalization of youth. And and it's been said too, and I don't want to create like this wedge between youth and adults, because the truth of the matter is young people who get incarcerated come out as adults. And then all of a sudden, so they were dismissed when they were young people, treated as an adult, and then they come out and now they're grown-ups and ain't nobody give a shit about them. You know what I mean? And a lot of times when they got locked up, they were kids who had kids. You know what I'm saying? So it's complicated. So I want to say that much. But what everybody's talking about is this piecemeal reform shit, particularly focused around sentencing. And nobody's talking about how we cut the snake's head off. So one of the things we've been wanting to do is really focus on ending the criminalization of youth. And one of the things here in California that really expanded the criminalization of youth was Proposition 21, which was passed a little over 15 years ago. And basically what it did is it took infractions and it elevated them to misdemeanors. Misdemeanors elevated those to felonies, and it gave the discretion of a district attorney to try a youth as young as 14 years old as an adult. Why would we give that power to a DA, to a prosecutor? That's a conflict of interest. So, we are trying to dismantle Prop 21 and then some. But immediately what we did is myself and some advocates from across the state spent a good time of our winter break and staying up till midnight on conference calls, and we wrote up a 75-page document that was going to fundamentally transform the youth justice system here in California. And then when we started shopping around to people who might potentially fund it, it got watered down to maybe about 5% of what we wanted to do, but it's going to still fundamentally change the way young people are impacted, and there's still a lot more work to do. So what it will do, Prop 57, and one of the people who endorsed it and is pretty much bankrolling it is actually the governor, ironically. So Prop 57 will end the practice of direct file by DAs. DAs will no longer be able to file a young person and try them in adult court. However, judges will have discretion. So the way I look at it, we got some messed up judges too, so we want to go after that eventually too. But it will shift discretion from DAs to judges. The other thing it will do is anyone who understands just trial law understands the significance of burden of proof. And it will shift the burden of proof from the defense to the prosecution. That will keep more young people in youth court, another very important variable. The last thing, which very few people even know this about Prop 57, it's one of my favorite parts of Prop 57 because of the 95% of shit that we wrote up that got tossed because it wasn't viable politically, is all other aspects of Prop 21, because it was state ballot initiative would require a 3/4 majority in the state legislature if we were trying to make changes. Now, because if Prop 57 is passed by voters in November, it will only require a simple majority of 50%. Much easier to make legislative changes moving forward to start to dismantle Prop 21. So Prop 57 is something a lot of our young people are working on. They're having an action tomorrow. We have a cohort, what we call Homies for Justice. We got 20 some odd young systems impacted young people from right here in Oakland who've been directly impacted by these issues, and they're organizing. They had a little action project that they were going to do, and they couldn't pick one, so they said, well, we're going to do a rally, a march, and a block party. You got to love them, man. You got to love them. From ages 13 to 19, you know what I mean? And so the same time we're going to be meeting, and to me, like at first I'm like, damn, that's just doing too much, and we got this going on too. But to me, I'm like, I'm proud that we can actually have something like this going on at the same time that my young people are out there and some of the staff are supporting them, and they're holding down this march, rally, and block party. You know what I'm saying? So there's going to be live art.
And voter registration, and voter education. Yeah, and folks are coming tonight to the fundraiser and to the event tonight. You'll get to hear from some of them. And one of the young women from Homies for Justice is going to actually sing and perform tonight. So I really want to just plug that folks go take a break and come back tonight. And in the spirit of kind of Homies for Justice and all of our ancestors and folks who have been in the struggle, I'm going to ask folks who can stand to stand and join me in a unity clap and to close out this part of the panel. So, can you hold this? No. So we started. This is actually something I recently learned from the young people at Homies for Justice, and I thought I knew this clap, and then I'm like, dang, you realize what you don't know when you work with young people every day. So they're always like, it's the beat of the heart, so put your hand on your heart. And then they we start slow and we move fast. This comes from the farm workers and Filipino farm worker struggle. And so, Filipino Mexican, yeah. And so we start slow